The crowd was gathered, moving about in the sweltering afternoon heat, laughter echoing, children running with balloons, vendors shouting over the clamor of busy festival booths. Chicago's West Side was alive with the usual chaos of a summer festival. But the mood in the park was about to change. In the center of it all, a stage stood quietly, nothing grand, just a makeshift setup with a few folding chairs for the audience. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, casting long shadows across the crowd as the local talent competition began. A few nervous hopefuls had already performed, some singing, others dancing, but nothing had caught the attention of the crowd like this next act. A small figure, a young girl, no older than 12, stepped forward, carrying nothing but a scratched-up violin case. She stood awkwardly at the front of the stage, clearly out of place. Her dark hair was untidy, tangled in waves that framed her delicate face. She was dressed in a faded dress with worn-out shoes, the kind of shoes you only saw in the city's forgotten corners, where dreams didn't seem to exist. The audience went silent for a moment, unsure of what they were seeing. Was she really about to perform? Ethan Carter, a wealthy real estate mogul who had shown up only for the media coverage, couldn't help but sneer. He had seen enough of this charity nonsense. Talent? He was here for his own image, nothing more. He shifted in his seat, leaned forward, and, with a raised brow, looked the girl up and down. You. His voice was loud, clear, cutting through the space like a blade. Play something. If you're any good, I might just adopt you, get you out of that dirty life. The crowd chuckled, and some snickered. Ethan wasn't just making a joke, he was making an example of the girl, using her for sport, something to pass the time. This was how it worked for him, everyone had their place. The crowd knew it. The girl knew it. But Amara Simmons, the girl on stage, did not flinch. She opened the violin case slowly, as if in a trance, her eyes focused on the instrument as though it was the only thing in the world that could save her. The familiar wood of the violin was smooth in her hands, a silent promise to her mother, who had given it to her years ago. Amara wasn't here to impress anyone. She wasn't here for charity. She was here because, for once, she had the power to speak through the music. Have you ever felt like you were judged before you even had a chance? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe, because this is only the beginning of Amara's journey. You don't want to miss what happens next. The first note hit the air, and something strange happened. It wasn't the hesitant, nervous sound the crowd had expected. No, this was something else, something deeper, darker. The bow moved across the strings with an ease that belied Amara's small frame. The sound was raw, alive with emotion, as if every stroke of the bow was drawing out the sorrow and hope she had carried inside for years. The music was a voice, her mother's voice. And it spoke more powerfully than anything Amara could ever say. The crowd, initially laughing at the spectacle, fell silent. The energy in the park shifted. The music moved through the crowd like an invisible force. People stopped what they were doing, turned their heads, and listened, really listened. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't refined. But it was real, raw, and unrestrained. Ethan's smile faded as the music continued to flow. His eyes darted from Amara to the crowd, who were no longer laughing but now utterly captivated. How was this possible? She shouldn't be able to play like this. The violin's voice carried with it a haunting familiarity that Ethan couldn't place. The piece wasn't just a song, it was something personal, something that carried the weight of a life unknown. It was his mother's favorite song, one he had overheard in his mansion years ago. But this girl didn't know that. Or did she? Comment below and tell me, if you were in Amara's shoes, would you have the courage to play your heart out like that, despite being judged? Subscribe now if you want to know the truth behind Amara's story, because this girl has a gift the world will never forget. Then, a voice rang out from the back of the crowd, a woman's voice, clear and trembling with disbelief. Wait a second. The woman pushed through the crowd, making her way toward the stage, her eyes locked on Amara. It was Dr. Sarah Davis, a professor at Juilliard, known for discovering some of the world's most talented musicians. But this was something different. Sarah knew this music, and her heart skipped a beat as she stepped closer, her hands shaking. That piece, she took another step forward, her voice low and shaky. "I wrote that." The crowd murmured in confusion. "What does she mean?" they whispered, eyes darting between Sarah and Amara. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the girl. How was this even possible? She had composed that piece in the quiet of her own study, never sharing it with anyone but her closest friends. She hadn't even published it. Amara stopped playing, her eyes lifting to meet Sarah's. For the first time since she'd started playing, she made eye contact, not with the audience, but with Sarah. A silent understanding passed between them. "My mom used to play this for me," Amara said softly, the words barely above a whisper. Sarah's mouth went dry. The floodgates opened as memories flooded her mind, her late-night practice sessions, the time she had spent in the city, playing for herself after long days of work. Lena Simmons, Amara's mother, had been a cleaner in her apartment building. They had never talked much, but Sarah remembered her. She remembered the music. But never in a million years did Sarah think Lena's daughter would be standing here, playing her forgotten piece with such raw power. And that's when it hit Ethan. He didn't have to guess. He knew the face in the photograph, Lena Simmons. She had worked for him years ago. He had never helped her, even when she had come to him asking for help. He had turned his back on her, just like he had turned his back on everyone else he deemed insignificant. He had forgotten her, until now. If you thought that was a shocking twist, hit subscribe now. Amara's journey is only beginning, and there's much more to this story than meets the eye. You won't want to miss how everything unfolds. Ethan stood up, attempting to hide the unease that was slowly creeping into his veins. He cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. The usual bravado that had always served him well felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The little girl he had mocked, Amara, wasn't just playing for the crowd. She was playing for something far more significant. And for the first time in years, Ethan Carter, the man who controlled the world around him, felt small. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their applause a muted acknowledgement of what had just unfolded. The billionaire businessman, who had expected to be the one holding the reins, had just been outdone by the faintest spark of authenticity. Comment below, what would you have done if you were in Amara's shoes? Would you take control of your life like she did, despite all the odds? Subscribe now to follow Amara's journey from the streets to the stage, because trust me, her story is one that will leave you speechless. The applause was deafening, but it wasn't for Ethan. It wasn't for the wealth, the status, or the people that typically held the spotlight in the city's elite circles. No, this time, the applause was for a girl they hadn't seen before, a girl who had risen from the forgotten corners of the city to take the stage, not with performances of perfection, but with something much more powerful, truth. But Amara Simmons wasn't basking in the applause. She wasn't waiting for their approval, their validation. She was still gripping the violin tightly, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, her eyes focused on the crowd but seeing nothing. It was as though the entire world had disappeared except for the music, except for the haunting melody that had spilled from her heart, her mother's heart, and now echoed into eternity. Ethan, sitting at the front, felt an unfamiliar stir in his chest. He had expected a laughable spectacle, a little girl who would stumble through an awkward tune. But this? This wasn't just a song. This was a revelation. Amara had stripped him bare, and now, as he looked at the crowd's reaction, he realized that he had lost control, not just of the performance, but of the narrative. He had mocked her. And she had turned the tables, showing him a strength he had never imagined from someone so young, so overlooked. But what made it worse was the feeling that had settled in his stomach. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just anger at being outdone. It was a sense of guilt he couldn't explain. A recognition that somewhere, deep in the shadows of his past, he had helped create this moment. Have you ever been caught off guard by someone you underestimated? Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe now to follow Amara's journey. Trust me, the best is yet to come. Amara didn't wait for the last note to fade before she lowered the violin. She had finished. Her hands, still shaking, held the instrument close to her body like a shield. The applause continued, but it felt like the sound was moving in slow motion. Amara could hear the distant cheers, the soft murmurs of, "Who is she?" and, "Where did she learn to play like that?" But none of it reached her. The girl who had once been invisible, the girl who had lived a life of struggle in a run-down neighborhood, now stood at the center of attention. But for the first time in her life, she didn't need their approval. She had her mother's spirit, her mother's legacy, and this moment was for her. But the reality of what had just happened hit her hard. Ethan Carter, the man who had so easily mocked her, stood in the back of the crowd, his eyes wide with disbelief. And Sarah, Dr. Sarah Davis, a woman who had been a stranger until today, was now watching her with the kind of attention only a professional musician could give. Sarah's face was ashen, but her eyes were filled with something else, something Amara couldn't quite read. Ethan cleared his throat and stood up, his voice sharp as he tried to take control. Enough of this. He waved a hand as if to brush away the tension. The crowd seemed to snap back to reality, the spell broken. He cleared his throat again, trying to shake the feeling that had settled in his chest. It's just a fluke. A lucky performance. But it wasn't. Amara knew it wasn't. She had lived her whole life with the sound of her mother's violin echoing in her ears, the same way that every other child learned to breathe. It had been their escape, the music, the one thing that had made the world feel a little less cruel. Comment below and tell us, if you had a chance to show your true power in a moment like that, would you have done it? Where are you watching from? Subscribe now to stay on this journey with Amara, her story's about to take a dramatic turn. Amara turned, slipping off the stage and walking toward the side of the crowd, ignoring the stares, the whispers, and the clapping hands. She didn't care about the attention anymore. She was walking towards something far more important, something that had been missing in her life for so long. Sarah Davis stood near the edge of the crowd, her eyes fixed on Amara. Amara could see the confusion in the woman's face, but also the curiosity, the recognition. There was a sense of urgency in the way she moved toward Amara, almost like she was afraid to lose her. "You," Sarah said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You're playing my composition." She didn't look like she was in control of her emotions, and for a moment, Amara thought she might collapse from the weight of the revelation. "My mom used to play it for me," Amara said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, her words floating in the air between them. You knew it from her?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide, 1,000 questions running through her mind. The woman who had composed the piece years ago was now staring at the girl who, somehow, had inherited it. It wasn't just music that had passed down through generations, it was pain, memory, and legacy. Sarah took a step back, trying to gather herself. She reached out, but then stopped, unsure of how to speak, how to bridge the distance between them. But in that moment, a new realization was dawning on her. Amara wasn't just a prodigy, she was connected to something deeper than Sarah had ever expected. And then, standing just behind Amara, Ethan's voice rang out again. "Enough of this. It's a publicity stunt. Nothing more." But his words didn't carry the same weight as they had before. His face had turned pale, and there was something almost desperate in his eyes now. He hadn't counted on the emotion that had come with this performance. He hadn't counted on the girl, this little girl, who had just shattered the facade he had built around himself. Ethan had seen the music as a way to control the narrative, but instead, Amara had taken control. The crowd, the media, everyone, they were captivated by her, not by him. She had stolen his thunder. Hit subscribe and stay with us. Amara's journey isn't just about music. It's about something much bigger. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's next. Tell me where you're watching from and comment your thoughts on what just happened. The realization slowly set in as the crowd began to disperse. Amara, despite the attention, wasn't fazed. The stage had been set. The music had done its job, and now, she was free. But for Ethan, there was a new weight on his shoulders. The audience was no longer focused on the gifts he could offer, they were focused on the truth of the girl who had just played. The hidden stories behind the music. And somewhere deep down, Ethan knew that Amara Simmons had just exposed him for what he truly was, a man who could buy anything but never had the ability to appreciate the worth of what was right in front of him. Amara wasn't a thing to be bought. She was something that could never be controlled. And now, she was free. The hum of the city night seemed to pulse through Amara as she walked through the streets, each step heavier than the last. The echoes of the festival were still with her, the performance, the applause, and above all, Ethan's words. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed a line, but it wasn't a line she could go back across. Her fingers lightly brushed the violin case strapped to her back, the weight of it a constant reminder of everything her mother had given her, everything she'd inherited from the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her. But now, with the truth settling into her chest like a stone, Amara had to face what Sarah had said. Ethan hadn't just humiliated her mother. He had manipulated her, used her for his own gain. And now, Amara had to live with the knowledge that her mother's silence, her protection, had been one last barrier to keep her from the truth. That truth was worse than Amara had imagined. If you think Amara has the strength to fight back, hit subscribe now and stay with her through this journey. This is only the beginning. As Amara walked, her mind raced with questions, each one darker than the last. Why had her mother stayed silent? Had she known all along that Ethan was using her, and if so, why had she never said anything? The gap between the mother Amara had known and the truth that Sarah had revealed was widening with every step. Turning the corner, she finally arrived at her apartment, small, worn, and tucked away from the bright lights of the city. The building hadn't changed in the years she had lived there, yet now it felt different. It was no longer a place of refuge. It was a place haunted by Ethan's influence. Her mother had lived here, worked for Ethan, and never spoke of it. Not even when times were tight, when food was scarce, and when Amara had asked her about the past. Amara now understood that her mother's silence wasn't just to protect her from the world. It was to protect her from the truth that Amara wasn't ready to face. What would you do if you found out the truth about someone you trusted your entire life? Subscribe now to stay updated, because Amara is about to take on more than she ever expected. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, the violin case resting beside her, her hands trembling. She tried to piece together what Sarah had told her. Her mother had been in debt to Ethan, a debt that had kept her tied to his world for far longer than she had ever let on. Amara had always thought of Ethan as the man who could help them, who could change their lives, but now she understood. He had taken advantage of her mother's trust. He had promised her help, and instead, he had only drawn her into deeper manipulation. The more Amara thought about it, the more betrayed she felt. Her mother had lived in the shadow of Ethan's control, unable to break free, unable to protect Amara from what was coming. But the worst part was the knowledge that Ethan knew her mother's pain and used it. How could a man so rich, so powerful, be so cruel? As she sat there, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She hesitated for a moment. It was late, and the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door to find Sarah Davis, standing there in the dim hallway, looking slightly out of place. Sarah? Amara asked, surprised to see her. She had expected to be alone tonight, still processing everything Sarah had revealed. I couldn't leave without talking to you again, Sarah said, stepping into the room. She looked around the small space, her eyes lingering for just a moment on the photographs that lined the walls, photos of Amara and her mother, smiles frozen in time. I didn't expect you to come here, Amara said, stepping aside to let her in. What is it? What's going on? Sarah hesitated before speaking, her voice quieter now. Amara. Ethan's been hiding something from you, something I should have told you earlier. Amara's heart skipped a beat. Hadn't Sarah already told her everything? What could there possibly be left to say? But there was something about Sarah's eyes, something that told Amara this conversation wasn't over. What is it? Amara pressed. Sarah took a deep breath, then met Amara's gaze. Ethan didn't just manipulate your mother. He's still involved in the family business, your family's business. He hasn't just used you for this performance, Amara. He's used your mother's legacy to further his own agenda. Amara blinked in disbelief. What do you mean? My mom's legacy? Yes, Sarah said, her voice steady. Your mother's violin was more than just an instrument. It was a symbol, the very thing that tied Ethan to her, the thing that made her indispensable to him. But there's more. Your mother had an agreement with Ethan, an unspoken one, to keep you in the dark. She wanted to protect you, but by doing so, she kept you locked in this cycle of control. Amara felt her world tilting again, her stomach churning with new waves of confusion. Was she supposed to be angry? Was she supposed to be hurt? Her mother, the person she had looked up to for so long, had kept her in the dark, had kept her from knowing what Ethan really was. I don't know how to process this, Amara whispered. I've been living in a lie. How can I face him? How do I expose someone like Ethan? You've already begun, Sarah replied, her eyes serious. By playing your mother's music today, you didn't just perform, you revealed a truth. Now you have to face Ethan and make him answer for what he's done to both of you. Amara nodded, the weight of it all sinking in. The truth wasn't just a secret her mother had kept, it was a weapon, and now Amara had it in her hands. But the question was, what would she do with it? Subscribe now, this isn't the end of the story. Amara is about to face the man who has torn her family apart. Don't miss what happens next. The silence between them felt thick, but Sarah's presence gave Amara a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. She wasn't alone in this fight. Sarah had been where she was, had felt what she was feeling. And now, they both had to take the next step. But even as Amara prepared for the next confrontation, she knew this wasn't just about revenge. This was about breaking free from the chains that had held her and her mother in place for far too long. It was time to take back control. It was time for Ethan to face the consequences of his actions. And Amara? She was going to be the one to make sure he did. The cold wind swept through the alleyways of Chicago's west side as Amara stepped out into the night. The city was quiet, but not in the peaceful way that most people liked. It was a different kind of quiet, the kind that felt like something was lurking just below the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Amara had spent years avoiding the truth, wrapping herself in the comfort of what she thought she knew about her life. But now, with Sarah's revelations weighing heavy on her chest, everything she had built her identity on was falling apart. Her mother's past, and the truth of what Ethan had done, was a wall Amara couldn't ignore anymore. She walked with a sense of purpose, her mind racing as she made her way toward the small community center where Sarah had arranged to meet. The flickering streetlights cast eerie shadows on the pavement, and the air was thick with anticipation. Sarah had told her that Ethan wasn't just some distant figure in her life. He was part of a deeper web, a network of power and influence that extended far beyond Amara's understanding. But she hadn't yet heard the full story. Sarah had said there were documents, proof, that could expose Ethan's manipulation of her mother. And Amara was determined to get her hands on them. Subscribe now to stay with Amara as she digs deeper into the secrets Ethan has buried. This is just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The community center was small but bustling, filled with the warmth of local gatherings and the sounds of laughter from across the room. Sarah had mentioned that the documents were stored in a filing cabinet in the back, hidden away from prying eyes. As Amara entered, she saw Sarah sitting at one of the tables, waiting patiently. There was an urgency in her posture, a sense that time was running out. Amara couldn't help but feel the same weight pressing on her chest. Every step she took felt like a step towards something unknown, something she wasn't entirely ready to face. "You came," Sarah said, her voice soft but steady. Her eyes flicked to the door before she gestured for Amara to sit beside her. "I know this is a lot to process, but we don't have much time." Amara nodded, sitting down and glancing at the stack of papers in front of Sarah. The sight of it made her heart race. This was it, the moment when everything she thought she knew would change. "What's in these?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Proof," Sarah replied, her eyes meeting Amara's. "These documents show that Ethan didn't just manipulate your mother for money. He used her, for leverage in a deal that was meant to destroy families. He made her his pawn in a much bigger game." Amara swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She had always known Ethan was a powerful man, but she had never imagined how far he would go to protect his empire. "How did you get these?" Amara asked. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't want to drag you into this," Sarah said, pushing the papers toward Amara. "But when I saw you play today, when I heard your music, I knew it was time. Your mother's legacy, Amara, it's part of a much larger story. And if we don't expose Ethan now, no one will ever know the truth." Amara stared at the papers, her mind racing. Ethan had controlled her life without her even knowing it. He had controlled her mother's life. And now he was going to try to control hers. With trembling hands, Amara reached for the documents, flipping through the pages slowly. Each page revealed something more sinister, more shocking, than the last. There were financial records, emails, and letters between her mother and Ethan, all showing how he had manipulated her into a dangerous deal. The truth was finally coming to light. Do you think Amara has the strength to confront Ethan with this truth? Subscribe now and keep following her journey. You won't want to miss the next twist in her fight for justice. Amara felt a wave of anger wash over her as she read the final letter. It was from her mother, written just days before her death. It was clear that her mother had known she was being played by Ethan, but the desperation in her words was evident. She had wanted to protect Amara from the full extent of Ethan's control, but she hadn't been able to escape it herself. Amara clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the letter felt like it was pressing down on her, suffocating her with every word. She had spent so many years wondering why her mother had never told her the truth, but now she understood. Her mother had been a victim, just like her. And Ethan had used his power to manipulate them both. "I have to stop him," Amara said, her voice shaking with rage. "I have to make sure he never does this to anyone else." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "I know you do. But be careful, Amara. Ethan is powerful. He has resources, connections, and the kind of influence that can destroy anyone who stands in his way." "I don't care," Amara said, standing up, determination flooding her veins. "He took everything from me. And now I'm going to take it back." Subscribe now to follow Amara's fight for justice. She's about to take on the most powerful man in the city, and she needs you with her every step of the way. As Amara left the community center, the weight of what she was about to do settled into her bones. She was no longer just a girl playing for an audience. She was no longer just Ethan's victim. She was a force. And she wasn't going to let Ethan Carter get away with what he had done. The documents in her hand felt like a promise to her mother, to herself, and to the people who had been harmed by Ethan's manipulation. The fight was far from over, but Amara was ready. The streets of Chicago's West Side felt cold as Amara walked through them that night, but it wasn't the chill of the air that made her shiver. The weight of everything she had learned, everything that had happened over the past days, was pressing in on her like a weight she couldn't shake. Her mind raced through everything, the performance, her mother's sacrifice, and the newfound truth about Ethan Carter. Amara had spent years looking up to him, thinking of him as someone who could help them, who could change their lives. She had never known the dark side of the man who had quietly shaped the course of their fate. But now, the game had changed. The cards were on the table, and Amara was no longer the pawn. She had the power to expose Ethan. But with that power came the weight of responsibility. She had to be careful. Ethan wasn't just some businessman. He was a player in a much larger world, a world filled with danger and hidden agendas. And Amara was about to step into it. Subscribe now to stay with Amara through the twists ahead. Her fight for justice is just getting started, and you won't want to miss a moment of it. As Amara walked, her steps led her toward Sarah Davis's apartment. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows over the pavement. She felt nervous, but more than that, she felt determined. She had the documents now. She knew the truth. And it was time to act. Sarah had told her to take her time, to think it through carefully before confronting Ethan. But Amara wasn't about to wait. She couldn't. The anger inside her was too strong, and the more she thought about her mother's broken promises, the more she realized that Ethan had to answer for everything. As Amara approached Sarah's door, she noticed the light was on. She knocked, and after a brief moment, the door swung open to reveal Sarah. She looked tired, but her expression was one of quiet resolve. "You're here," Sarah said softly, stepping aside to let Amara in. "I didn't think you'd come this quickly." Amara glanced at her, a quiet confidence in her eyes. "I can't wait anymore. Ethan has to know the truth, and I can't back down." Sarah nodded but said nothing for a moment. She gestured for Amara to sit down. The small apartment was cozy, but the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The documents were spread across the table, each page a reminder of the mess they were about to confront. "Ethan will come at us with everything he has," Sarah said, finally breaking the silence. "He's a powerful man. He'll try to discredit you, discredit your mother's memory. You need to be prepared for that." Amara looked down at the documents in front of her, her fingers tracing the edges of the papers. "I'm ready. It's time to stop running from him." Sarah leaned forward. "Then we need to act quickly. You've got to get this information into the hands of someone who can take him down. We need someone with influence, someone who can expose him for who he really is." Amara's mind raced. She had the documents, the proof, but Sarah was right. They couldn't just release the information without making sure it reached the right people. Ethan would bury the truth if they didn't go about this carefully. "Who can we trust?" Amara asked, her voice quiet but determined. Sarah's eyes darkened. "There's a journalist, Lena Brooks, a reporter at the Chicago Tribune. She's been investigating Ethan for months, but he's had his people shut her down at every turn. She's the only one who has been willing to go up against him." Amara's heart raced. Lena Brooks. She had seen her name in the papers a few times, but hadn't thought much about it. A journalist investigating Ethan? That was exactly the kind of help they needed. "Where can we find her?" Amara asked urgently. "I'll set up a meeting," Sarah replied. "But you have to be careful. Ethan's people know who she is, and they'll be looking for any weakness. We need to get the story out quickly, before he can silence her." Amara's jaw clenched as she stood up, determination flooding her veins. "Let's do it. Now." Subscribe now to follow Amara's fight for the truth. The danger is growing, and the stakes have never been higher. The next few hours passed in a blur as Sarah made the necessary calls. Amara could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the choices they were making, but the urgency kept her moving forward. They couldn't afford to waste time. Ethan had too much power, and if they didn't act fast, the truth would slip away into the shadows again. Finally, Sarah's phone rang, and she picked it up, listening intently. "Lena, we're ready to meet. Come to the office tomorrow morning. It's the safest place for now." Amara felt her heart skip a beat. Tomorrow would be the day they started fighting back. Tomorrow, they would put everything on the line. The next morning, Amara stood outside the office building, waiting for Lena Brooks. The city was buzzing with life, but Amara felt disconnected from it all. She was no longer just a spectator, she was part of something bigger, something that could change everything. Lena arrived just before the meeting time, dressed in business attire, her expression sharp and focused. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, immediately walking up to Sarah and Amara with a sense of purpose. "You've got something for me?" Lena asked, her voice low but firm. Amara handed over the documents, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. This was it. Lena skimmed through the papers quickly, her eyes scanning the evidence before she looked up at Amara. "You know, this could get you both killed." Lena's tone wasn't threatening, it was real. "But I've seen what Ethan can do. He's already messed with too many lives." "We know," Sarah replied, her voice calm but resolute. "We want to make sure the truth comes out." Lena nodded, folding the papers carefully and tucking them into her briefcase. "I'll take care of this," she said. "But you both need to be ready. Ethan won't give up without a fight." Amara met her gaze, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Subscribe to keep following Amara's story. The battle is about to begin, and she needs your support more than ever. As Lena walked away, Amara felt a quiet storm brewing inside of her. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time, she wasn't just running from the truth. She was confronting it head-on. Ethan's reign of control over her family, over her mother, was about to come to an end. This was only the beginning. The sun had barely risen over the streets of Chicago's west side, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. The bustling noises of the city slowly crept to life, but to Amara, it all felt distant, unreal. She had never imagined her life would take a turn like this. A week ago, she was a girl trying to survive in a world of struggle, her mother's violin playing as the only escape from the harshness of their reality. And now, she was preparing to fight the most powerful man she knew, a man who had controlled her life, and her mother's, through lies and manipulation. Amara's mind was still reeling from the meeting with Lena Brooks. Sarah had introduced her to the journalist only hours earlier, but the encounter had already set a new course for Amara. Ethan was no longer just a powerful businessman, he was a criminal, someone who had used her mother, used them, to build his empire. Now, she had to expose him. There was no turning back. She stepped out into the early morning air, feeling the weight of her determination settle on her shoulders. The documents Sarah had given her and Lena last night were in her bag, each page filled with proof of the extent of Ethan's manipulation. But it wasn't just about the evidence, it was about taking control of a story that had been hidden for far too long. Subscribe now to stay with Amara as she continues her journey to expose Ethan. Things are heating up, and this is only the beginning. Amara arrived at the small office building where she was supposed to meet Lena. The wind had picked up, sending a chill through the air, but Amara hardly noticed. She had a meeting to attend, one that would change everything for her, for Sarah, and for everyone who had ever been manipulated by Ethan Carter. As Amara walked through the building's main doors, she was immediately greeted by Lena's sharp presence. She was waiting just inside the elevator, as though she had been anticipating this moment just as much as Amara had. Lena's expression was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. The same fire that had driven her to seek out the truth about Ethan. "You ready?" Lena asked, her voice low, but not without urgency. Amara took a deep breath, her hands slightly trembling. "I think I have no choice," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. Lena gave her a small, understanding smile. "We do this together. Let's make sure Ethan doesn't get away with it." The elevator doors slid shut, and for a brief moment, the two of them were alone in the confined space. The ride felt like it took longer than it should have, the slow hum of the elevator mixing with the weight of the situation. Amara couldn't help but wonder what was going to happen next. She'd spent her entire life avoiding confrontation, trying to stay unnoticed, keeping her head down. But now, that life was slipping away with every step she took. She was no longer hiding. When the elevator doors opened, Lena led the way through a narrow hallway into a small conference room. A large, polished table took up most of the space, and the sharp scent of coffee lingered in the air. The room felt cold, clinical. But it was the kind of space that made people like Ethan Carter squirm. The moment they entered, Lena's contact, a middle-aged man with glasses and a strong air of authority, stood up from his chair and extended his hand to both women. "Lena, Amara. Glad to see you both here. We've got a lot to discuss," he said, his tone crisp, professional. Amara hesitated for a moment, still unsure of what to expect. She had never met someone like this man before, someone who was in the business of taking down the powerful. But seeing the determination in his eyes made her feel like she wasn't alone in this fight. They were all in this together now. "Thank you for meeting with us," Amara said, trying to sound confident, even though her nerves were getting the better of her. The man nodded and motioned for them to sit down. "We don't have much time. Ethan's people are always watching. But this is what we have. I've gone through the documents you provided, and I can already tell you've got a case. We can bring him down, but we need to be very careful how we proceed. You're dealing with a man who has a lot of influence, and he's dangerous." Amara took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the table. It was finally happening. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Lena glanced at Amara, then back at the contact. "We need to make sure we're protected. Ethan's not the kind of man to just let things slide. He'll go after us, he'll go after Amara. We need the press involved, but we can't risk him shutting this down." The man nodded, his face set with a grim expression. "I understand. I've already made a few calls. The media will need to be involved, but we'll need a strong case to back it up. I'll contact a few reliable sources to get this out to the public, but I want to make sure Ethan's under investigation. It's the only way to keep him from covering his tracks." Amara could feel her pulse quicken. This was it, the first step toward making Ethan accountable for everything he had done. Subscribe now to follow Amara's journey as she faces Ethan head-on. The truth is about to be exposed, and it's going to shake everything to its core. "We've got the evidence," Lena said, her tone firm. "Now we just need the public to know the truth. Amara, you've got to be ready for what's coming. Ethan won't back down. He'll fight dirty." Amara nodded, her thoughts swirling. She had always felt powerless in her life, like the world was out of her control. But now, she had a chance to change that. She had the truth. She had the strength to expose Ethan's lies. "Let's do it," Amara said, her voice unwavering. "It's time." The meeting lasted for another hour as details were finalized, plans made, and strategies set in place. As the conversation wound down, Amara could feel the tension in her body begin to ease. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. There was still a long way to go before Ethan was finally brought to justice. When they stood to leave, the man gave them both a final look. "You're doing the right thing, Amara. But remember, this isn't just about you and Ethan. It's about exposing the system he's built. People need to know what he's done, and what he's capable of." Amara took a deep breath as she stepped out of the room, her mind focused and determined. She wasn't going to stop now. This fight wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about taking down the man who had made her and her mother's lives a living hell. And no matter what it took, Amara was ready to finish what she started. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds, casting uneven shadows across the small room. Amara stood in front of the window, staring out at the busy streets of Chicago's west side, her thoughts far from the usual city noise. The weight of everything she had learned over the last few days was beginning to settle in, and the pressure of Ethan Carter's reach felt more suffocating than ever. The documents were ready. Lena was ready. The plan was set into motion. And yet, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the fear of Ethan coming after them. There was something more, something hidden in the back of her mind, gnawing at her. Why was he so confident? How had he anticipated their every move so far? A buzzing sound broke her thoughts, pulling her attention to her phone. It was a text from Sarah. Ethan knows. He's moving fast. We need to meet tonight. The words hit Amara like a punch in the gut. Ethan knew. The feeling of dread that had been lingering in the back of her mind now spread throughout her body. How had he found out? They hadn't even made their move yet, and already he was one step ahead. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She quickly typed a response, "I'm on my way. We need to act tonight." Subscribe now to keep following Amara's journey as the stakes rise higher than ever. This is just the beginning, things are about to get even more dangerous. The hour that followed felt like a blur. Amara rushed through the apartment, gathering her things, preparing for the next step in this twisted game with Ethan. She had to make sure Lena was still on track, that the press conference was set, and that everything was in place for the world to hear the truth. But deep down, Amara knew it wasn't just about exposing Ethan. It was about taking back control of her own life, of her mother's legacy, and finally putting an end to Ethan's reign of terror. As Amara made her way to the community center, her thoughts churned. What had gone wrong? She had been so careful, so meticulous in the planning. But now, everything felt like it was unraveling too quickly. Was there someone on the inside? How had Ethan found out? She didn't have time to dwell on that now. She had to focus on the task at hand. Amara arrived at the community center just as Sarah was walking in. The two exchanged a brief but knowing glance, each feeling the weight of the situation. The clock was ticking. There was no more time for hesitation. "I don't get it," Amara said, voice tight with frustration. How did Ethan know about the documents? How could he have found out? Sarah exhaled slowly, her brow furrowing. "We don't know yet. But what we do know is that Ethan's got eyes everywhere. This wasn't just a fluke. He's been working behind the scenes to make sure we don't get the truth out. He's always been able to manipulate people. The question is, who tipped him off?" Amara ran a hand through her hair, pacing in the small space. Who could they trust now? Every step they had taken had been carefully planned, yet it felt like Ethan had anticipated every move, every conversation. Someone had to have known. "Lena's in danger," Amara said, her voice rising with panic. "Ethan won't let her get away with this. He'll stop at nothing to keep his secrets hidden." "I know," Sarah replied grimly. "That's why we need to act fast. But we can't rush into this without a plan. We need to get ahead of him." Subscribe now to stay with Amara as she uncovers the truth. Every move is more dangerous than the last, and the stakes are rising fast. Amara stopped pacing, turning to face Sarah. "What do you suggest? We don't have time to sit around and wait for things to fall apart. Ethan's going to try and stop us." Sarah nodded, the weight of the situation evident in her eyes. "I'm going to reach out to Lena's contact. We'll need her help to make sure the media gets a hold of the story before Ethan can silence it. We'll leak the documents to the press tonight, but we have to make sure we control the narrative." Amara's heart was pounding. Everything had been leading up to this moment. But now, with Ethan closing in on them, she couldn't help but feel like they were being pushed into a corner. No one could prepare for this kind of battle. No one could predict how far Ethan would go to protect himself. What happens if it's too late? Amara asked, her voice soft, the fear creeping into her tone. "If it's too late," Sarah said, "we keep fighting. We find another way. We don't give him the power to control us any longer." For the first time in days, Amara felt a spark of hope. She wasn't fighting this alone. She wasn't backing down. The day passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Amara, Sarah, and Lena worked quickly, finalizing their plans and ensuring that the documents would be released to the public in a way that couldn't be suppressed. But as evening fell, Amara felt the tension in the air grow thick. There was a feeling of inevitability that hung over everything. They were about to face Ethan head-on, and she could feel the weight of what that would mean. The media would be involved. The truth would be laid bare for the world to see. And Ethan? He would stop at nothing to cover his tracks. The moment of confrontation was coming, and it was up to Amara to make sure Ethan didn't win this time. But even with the plan set in motion, Amara couldn't shake the fear that Ethan had already made his move, that the battle was far from over. She stared at the documents one last time. This was it. No turning back. Ethan was going down. Subscribe now and stay with Amara as she faces the most dangerous chapter of her journey. The truth is almost here, but Ethan won't let it go easily. The evening of the press conference arrived. The location was set, the press was gathered, and the documents were ready to be released. But as Amara and Sarah arrived at the venue, something felt off. The air was thick with anticipation, but there was also an undercurrent of tension, a nagging feeling that they were walking into a trap. Amara checked her phone again, another message from Lena: Ethan's people are closing in on the venue. He knows we're about to expose him. Prepare for anything. The knot in Amara's stomach tightened. Ethan wasn't just watching them now. He was ready to fight back. Amara stood at the back of the room, hidden in the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with reporters, cameras, and the low hum of whispered conversations. But all Amara could hear was the roar of her own heartbeat. The press conference was about to begin, and everything had led up to this moment, the moment when the truth would finally come out. She could feel the weight of the documents in her bag, the evidence that would change everything. For so long, she had been running from the truth, hiding behind the walls her mother had built for her. But now, those walls were crumbling. She had the power to expose Ethan Carter for what he truly was, a man who had manipulated and destroyed the lives of so many, including her own. But there was a deeper fear gnawing at her, something that had been lurking in the back of her mind ever since they started this mission. What if it wasn't enough? What if Ethan had already prepared for this moment, ready to cover his tracks one last time? What if they weren't ready for the fight he was about to bring? Amara pushed those thoughts aside. She had come this far. She couldn't stop now. Subscribe now to stay with Amara through the final stage of her journey. The showdown with Ethan is here, and you don't want to miss it. Lena was at the front of the room, speaking to a few journalists, her face calm but determined. She had arranged everything for this conference, coordinated with the media, and made sure the story was going to break. She had been instrumental in getting this to the public, but now it was Amara's turn to take center stage. Are you ready? Sarah asked, her voice low as she stepped up beside Amara. Amara nodded, her jaw set, her hands trembling in her pockets. I think so. I don't know what Ethan is going to do when this hits, but I can't back down now. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a silent reassurance. You've already done more than most people would ever dare. Now, it's time for the world to know. As the doors to the conference room closed, Amara's mind flashed back to the day when she had first stood on that stage at the local talent show. It felt like a lifetime ago, a time when she was unknown, and the world seemed like a distant dream. But now, she had the truth, and the world was about to hear it. The lights in the room dimmed, signaling that the press conference was about to begin. Amara straightened up, her eyes locking with Lena's. This was it. Comment below and let us know if you think Amara will get the justice she deserves. Subscribe now, because the final battle is just getting started. Lena stepped forward, taking the microphone, and the crowd quieted. Good afternoon, everyone, she began, her voice calm but unwavering. Thank you for being here today. We have a story to tell you, one that's been hidden for far too long. A story of manipulation, deceit, and corruption at the highest levels. Amara's heart raced as she heard Lena's words. This wasn't just a press conference, it was the beginning of Ethan's fall. The room was filled with anticipation as Lena continued, explaining the background, introducing the documents, and setting the stage for what was to come. And then, Lena turned to Amara, her eyes filled with trust. Amara Simmons will now speak, and she will tell you everything. Amara felt the weight of the room shift as all eyes turned to her. For a moment, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. The bright lights, the cameras, the reporters, it all felt overwhelming. But she had no choice. She had prepared for this, and now it was time to speak the truth. She stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. My name is Amara Simmons. For years, I lived a life in the shadows, thinking I knew who I was and where I came from. But the truth was hidden from me. My mother, Lena Simmons, worked for Ethan Carter for years. He promised her a better life, a chance for us to escape our struggles. But he never delivered. Instead, he used her. The room was silent, hanging on every word she said. Amara could see the faces of the reporters, the shock and disbelief written across their expressions. But she wasn't finished yet. Ethan Carter didn't just manipulate my mother. He manipulated the lives of countless others, families destroyed, businesses ruined, and lives shattered, all so he could build his empire. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. And now, it's time for the world to know who he really is. Subscribe to stay with Amara as the world learns the truth about Ethan Carter. The fallout from this conference is going to be massive, don't miss out on the next chapter. Amara turned to Lena, who gave her a small nod of approval. She could see Ethan's empire starting to crumble, piece by piece, as the reporters began to shout questions, demanding answers. But the truth was already out, and there was no way for Ethan to silence it now. Just as Amara thought the tension would break, the door to the room swung open with a loud bang. Amara turned, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Ethan Carter himself standing in the doorway. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes locked on Amara with a cold, calculating glare. You think you can destroy me with this? Ethan's voice boomed across the room. The reporters recoiled, but no one left. They were too stunned, too fascinated by the man who had built this empire of lies. Amara's breath caught in her throat, but she stood tall, her hands steady at her sides. This isn't about destroying you, she said, her voice steady and resolute. It's about exposing the truth. For too long, you've controlled people with your lies, your wealth, and your power. But not anymore. Ethan stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his fists balled at his sides. You don't know what you're getting into, Amara. You've just started something you can't finish. Amara didn't flinch. She had been through too much to be intimidated by him now. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Ethan. Ethan's gaze hardened, but before he could say another word, the reporters closed in, their cameras flashing, their questions flying. The room was chaos as the truth spread like wildfire. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the power of the moment surge through her. This wasn't just about her mother. It was about every life Ethan had ruined, every person who had suffered because of him. And Amara was going to make sure he couldn't escape.